Okay, I appreciate your patience, folks. There are 7 First Nations registered in the Okanagan Nation Alliance, and our nation extends across the settler colonial borders, and it goes into the Washington State, parts of Idaho. And much like many of you might relate, many of our nation members every week have lost a relative. So the original Silk Indigiqueer Council members were at capacity because they had multiple losses in their immediate families. So I've been able to generously ask relatives who are in rural and remote communities to be able to share some words with you. 2 of us are from these homelands, and 2 are invited guests at the behest of Sunshine, myself, Taylor, and McKelty. Because as you recall, they said you're uninvited guests because you folks have not demonstrated an invitation yet. So first off, what you squeezed in Chichin and me, Walano Kilchudin, Tu Akui Spahulao, and Watlan. My name is Percy. That's my Indian name. But the name given to me by the life giver in my life is in Chichin, and that was shared with my late niÄa Aubrey. And it's something that I did not feel proud of saying because of how they came to end of life terms. And it was painful because I was very close to my niÄa. But now I proudly say, why you squeezed in Chichin? Hello, my name is Percy. These are my homelands. So when you talk about how beautiful it is, when you talk about the ways in which you've been able to thrive as community members, it's been at the generosity of me, my family, my community, and my nation. So that's who I am, and this is where I'm from. But the paid work that I do, I'm the chair of Indigenous Studies at Wilfrid Laurier University. I'm one of possibly 3 people who are Indigenous, 2-spirit, trans, disabled, who's on a tenure-track position, and a chair in Canada. I say shame to the academic industrial complex that there are only a handful that I can count on one hand that reflects intersecting identities and critical voices that are so necessary in those institutions. I also bring with me about 38 years of helping as a social worker, and that started on these lands because grid, and I know some old timers in here knows what that means. When it came to the interior here, grid happened, gay cancer, HIV, and I was able to start the first condom exchange in Simpinkton, which is a village between lakes and what you know as Penticton, in the mid-80s, and which started my helping career, and which has taken me to Vancouver, Victoria, Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland, Toronto, New York, all of these places as a helper, which now is formerly known as social work. And I always had questions. Why are things the way they are? Why am I experiencing microaggressions and microassaults for who I am and how I am related to this land? And why am I asked to bear witness to anti-Black racism with folks who are Indigenous as Afro-Indigenous and Black Indigenous folks? So I became a researcher. And then decided I love to be in conversation with folks to help disrupt the ways in which heteropatriarchy, whiteness, impacts me, my identities, the lands I'm from, where I'm an invited guest, my families, my communities, and my nations. So I decided to become a professor. Don't do it. So I recognize that some people might think those are wonderful accomplishments, but I also want to center how I'm complicit and the ongoing harms that happen to First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Afro-Indigenous, and Black Indigenous people. That those systems continue to cause harm, regardless of what their intent is. The impact is we're still being researched to death. The impact is that when we show up in urban spaces to be in kinship with queer folks, we're allowed to enter, but we have to leave our indigeneity at the door. When we need help, we're weighted to death. And a lot of us are creating those conditions for our relatives at our spaces, wherever we're at, for our volunteer work or our paid work. So that's my paid work. And so community directs me to be in conversation with you, to leverage the fact that I have alphabet soup, a PhD in women and gender studies, and a doctorate in philosophy, in spaces like this. And the first one started with CBRC, when I asked folks to get your baskets in order, because we're literally dying. And we can do better and be better, right? Because that was pushing possibilities. And now I recognize many people in here are in spaces where Indigenous people are, but again, the conditions for them to leave their indigeneity at the doors for pride or entry into our parades is being asked to be left at the door. And so I wanted to be in conversation with you how we can be, as Dr. Alex Wilson has said, welcome back our relatives into the circle. Because without Indigenous people, there is no pride. Without Indigenous inclusion in decision making, it's not sustainable and it's tokenistic. So volunteer work, I was president of CPATH, national organization that wanted to talk about the experiences of Black, Indigenous, and racialized, transgender, diverse folks. Don't know what's happening there. Got handed over to non-BIPOC folks, and yeah, I'll let that speak for itself. I'm on the executive as a co-chair of Two Spirits in Motion, and I'm a director helping Free Update Canada Pride metamorphosize and how to be better and do better for all of us. And I'm also the host, non-recognized with the charitable organization. The headman because our people function on the oldest. So I'm the oldest, so I'm the executive director of the Seal Indigenous Queer Council, where this gathering is taking place and where Kelowna Pride gets the benefit from being able to be in conversation and host, make a bid for this gathering to happen here. So that's some of the things that I'm responsible for, but I want to less talk and turn it over to our panelists who are going to be able to help you fill your baskets and contribute to the way that you include First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Afro-Indigenous, Black Indigenous relatives and kin when it comes to celebrating a 2S LGBTQI experience in your prides in the coming months and the coming years for those who have been successful in the bids for it to come to your communities next. So with that, it's a conversation. I ask that you take what you want, interrogate why you don't want to take anything, and in your own communities, figure out ways in which you can actualize what we have to share, starting with the young people who open in a particular way, with the ways in which I'm engaging with you, and the ways, more importantly, the folks who are in rural and remote communities have a to-do list and experiences of how you can center First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Afro-Indigenous, and Black Indigenous experiences in Pride. So be patient, because it was last ask minute of these relatives. So it's a series of questions, and they're going to engage with it to their comfort level, and they will share with you with what resonates with them. So I'm going to first start with Sunshine, and then I'll start that way. To my left, sorry, I'm nervous. Because asking them means I sponsor them. And so I'm responsible for any transgressions that happen in this room, and I want to care through an ethic of care for my relatives in here who have graciously agreed to be part of this conversation. So the first question I have for you folks, I'll start with Sunshine, is who are you? What are some of your responsibilities?
Okay, well, hello, I'm Sunshine, and that's my Indigenous name. My English colonized name is Sean. I don't identify with that name. It's my English name was given to me, but it does not, I don't feel like it resonates for me. Being given the name Sunshine was really an amazing experience. It was given to me based on relatives knowing who I am and giving me a name that resonated. So I'm Sunshine, I'm Two-Spirit. I use he, him pronouns. And my responsibilities. Really, I feel like my responsibility is marrying my experience as an Indigenous person and a deaf person into who I am, connecting as a Two-Spirit person, and educating people by presenting workshops, facilitating events, being in conversation with people, really developing the conversations that we need to have and making sure there's space for those to take place. And then, as far as what I do, my paid work, I'm a CSW, a community support worker. And I took my schooling in Toronto. And through my schooling, I really looked at how I can bring my experiences and my identities as an Indigenous person, a deaf person, a queer person, and how to marry those all together, interact, be in community with those identities, and share what it is like for me to be in community with these identities. Also share that there's not many resources out there, so I can act as a resource. I can educate people about what it's like to be a deaf or hard of hearing person, the access barriers that we face as well. I feel like there's much more that I can say, but I do want to save time for the other folks up here, so I will stop there. But if you have any questions, want to know more about me, I am here with interpreters, so by all means, please chat with me.
Hi, my name is Angelina Perea. My pronouns are she, they. I am a Two-Spirit person. I'm Afro-Indigenous. I'm Colombian and Métis, Ojibwe and French. Please bear with me. I don't like public speaking and I'm really nervous. My family name is Parisian. My family comes from a small Métis town called Rooster Town. I grew up and I still currently live on Treaty 1 territory. I am the Youth Council and Podcast Coordinator at Two Spirits in Motion. I am also the Youth Representative on MMBI Board of Directors, and I'm also the Manitoba rep on the NWAC Youth Council. I'm also married. I've been married for almost 2 years. My wife's name is Alex. And I came out when I was 12.
I apologize if this part will be in niÄa, but I will translate to English afterwards. Ete Ochihuatl Kapanotatlan, Manahuac, Motoca Quetzala, Nicaragua Mesticex, Ninemi Kapanotatlan, Pueblo Dene Masquiam Naitahu, Tlatzocamati, y Ninemi Kapanotatlan, Siul, Kilona, Tlatzocamati, Percy, Tlatzocamati, Kapuni, Lezard, Tlatzocamati. I want to start by just saying thank you. Thank you to the youth who gave us so much of an education in just a couple of moments, asking us to stand up, asking us to say words out loud, asking us to challenge our own insecurities that have nothing to do with being good relatives on Indigenous territories. I want to give really big thanks for that. And thank you to the Lezard family for having us here, and thank you to Percy for having us here. This isn't the first time that Percy's asked me to get on the mic last minute. It is the most notice I've had, 2 days. But the fact that we have them in the room, like there's incredible Two-Spirits in the room who've had intergenerational impacts and who've shaped the Two-Spirit movement in this room. But the fact that they give the youth roles and they support the youth having power and they're able to hand over those roles and allow us to inherit them and allow us to grow into them is something that I don't see a lot of every other queer community doing. And so I really want to thank Percy for the role model work that they're doing and the way that they carry themselves without judgment to other people who don't do the same, but they just carry that energy. So I'm grateful for that today. I'm Quetzala Carson. I'm niĽa. My motherland is in Central America, in what is now called Nicaragua. So I come to you as an invited guest, but who has not always been invited. I currently hold the title of Mr. International Two-Spirit, which was given to me through the International Two-Spirit gatherings, which have been held annually for, I think, Auntie Albert knows more than me, so I'm not going to say for how long. But I'm also the executive director of Edmonton Two-Spirit Society. I'm a nița, I'm intersex, I'm an only child, and so I carry those responsibilities of a nița. I'm growing into the middle generation as someone who's 30. And for the weekend here, I am your Two-Spirit ombudsman. And so for Two-Spirit folks, what that means is if you have any concerns, if you have any worries, if you need some more space or anything like that, come talk to me so that I can figure out who to talk to at Fierté and give you that support. Or if you've got some comments and things you need the board of Fierté to think about in the future, or their staff to think about in the future, let's talk about it so that we can make sure it's documented somewhere. And also for non-Two-Spirit folks, I want to recognize that, I want to ask you to take care of Two-Spirit labor while we're here. It's really easy to pick out who's racialized. It's really easy to start a conversation with them when it's not their working hours, when it's not time that they need to be explaining who they are and what work they do, or what their identity is, or what their connection to this land is. Those are questions that require consent. And I want to recognize that a lot of the Two-Spirits in this room are very young. And so also recognize that when you approach them and when you ask them with your entitlement, what is Two-Spirit? That you are someone who's coming with more power, with more time on this earth, with all of that, and that's how you're approaching a young person, asking them to justify their identity to you. And I've seen it happen, I lost count after 12 times yesterday. And so I'm not gonna speak for my relatives and say that you can go up to them and ask them questions, but recognize there's people here who hold power, who can answer those questions, who are on par with you. You can have those conversations with. And also, I'm here. If you've got questions, I might not have the answer for them, but I might be able to connect you with someone. I might be able to send you a YouTube link. I might be able to give you something so that you have those resources that you're looking for, or connect you with somebody in your area. But just please take care of that labor of these young folks. I know that's not a part of my introduction, but that's how my comments are going to continue going. So thank you so much for your patience with me today.
So the next question I have for our relatives, and I'll start with Quetzala and come this way, like an accordion back and forth, or like a wave, or like a fire, because fire season's about to start. And part of my cultural responsibilities is I come from a line of hereditary chiefs, and that's not something that I like to talk about because I don't like to talk about myself. But I'll talk about also a helper, a hunter and a fisher, and as firekeepers. I didn't wake up one morning and say, oh, I want to do this. No, these are things that we're born into. And I recognize me stating that to the First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Afro-Indigenous, Black Indigenous folks, that they may have disconnected in us. In no way to shame or to point out that you haven't. Colonialism, an ongoing colonialism, has impacted all of us. And I'm still reconnecting. The ways in which I was expelled from my community, my homelands, because of homophobia. I'm trying to make my way home. So that's what some people have over me, or some people are able to role model ways in which that can happen. In the context of Pride, because we have organizers in the room, hopefully folks are taking notes, and I'm trying to role model to you that this is what it can look like to center the voices of the people of the original people of the lands. You open more than just a song and a prayer, but you center the voices of the diversity of the original people of those lands. And you let them be in conversation. And that's what I'm trying to role model for you, that you folks who have the next gatherings, you have the capacity to make the decisions to do this and actually center the voices and the experiences of the original people of those lands. Because you've had, since the Red Paper Policy of 1969, you've had, since we produced a For Us By Us, the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People. You've had, since 2015, the one of 94 calls to action. And you've had, since 2020, the National Inquiry. And you've had, since April 2021, the calls to justice for the Two-Spirit Final Report on gender-based violence. So you've been given direction since 1969 on how to center and elevate the voices of First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Afro-Indigenous, Black Indigenous. And I'm reminding you of that. And I'm demonstrating and role modeling what it can look like outside a trauma-porn lens, but to truly see us thriving and experiencing joy, because we're more than just the trauma that happens to us, right? So with that, my next question that I'd like Quetzala to start us off with is, what has pride meant for you in the context of not being in a large city?
I want to start by acknowledging that I'm a migrant, and so having been an invited and uninvited guest in the different places that I've lived, that's really going to shape the conversation that I have. I know a lot of the folks in this room are not Indigenous to these territories, and so I'm going to speak to you as a guest, and speak to you as someone who has become a relative. And to be honest, pride doesn't mean much to me. As a displaced Indigenous person, when I went to Pride when I was younger, that was a place where white people told me I'm not Two-Spirit, because I'm not First Nations, Métis, or Inuit. And so it was maybe around like five to 8 years that I was a member of Two-Spirit community and consistently reminded by outsiders, you are not a part of this community. And so I just stopped participating at all. And last year was the first Pride that I really participated in because my job requires me to be there. And so I just want to think of the idea of like the work that a lot of us are doing to expand Pride, to expand the networks that we have, to expand the good feelings that we have into communities that maybe are ours or aren't ours. But I just want to say it's audacious and entitled to project pride into communities that we do not have relationships with or that we do not have roots in. And that entitlement, that idea of this is good, this is how it should be, let's make this everywhere, is white supremacy. That is colonial violence. That is not reflection, that is not relationship building, that is deciding what humanity looks like and pushing everyone into that. And so an idea of this is, and we talk about it often, of what is the idea of coming out versus what is the idea of coming into community. Because there's an entitlement that is really sacred. That entitlement to belonging, that entitlement to be understood, that entitlement to your basic rights being taken care of, that is the entitlement that we have. And how do we go into spaces that are not ours when people are fighting and struggling for their basic access to rights and tell them what you should actually prioritize is a really great party. What you should actually prioritize is a huge celebration. What you should actually prioritize is a thing that only a certain percentage of your population is actually going to feel welcome in, is going to be included in, and will also cause further divides and further isolation inside your already existing community. So what is the energy that comes when we are asking someone to feel pride, and when we have not asked them, are you surviving? Are you living? How are you being taken care of? How do I take care of your needs? And I think that this is, I have what I call a two-spirit talk with a lot of youth, where we talk, are you going to be gay, or are you going to be two-spirit? And it's not a binary. They're one of those graphs with the circles that touch and kiss. But also, I'm a dropout academic. But that I think a lot of and a lot of us have had to use the words gay, lesbian, queer, trans, bi, because those are the only words that exist. And that's the way that we make ourselves translatable in English. So I'm trying to really identify white queer identities as being born in resistance and being centering, I will not get married. I will not have children. I will not be with this person. I will not follow these expectations that exist within white hetero cis supremacy. And that is born inside of an individualist and an isolationist culture, where if you decide to not be what's normal, you're deciding that you're not a human. You're deciding that you don't deserve these rights. You're deciding that you are outside. And pride exists because of that. Pride is a trauma response. The idea that we need to exist in our community in isolation is saying that, I'm going to take a little jump, but the idea that we need to have our own events that are only queer, that are only gay, that are only bi, that are only for our different intersections of our community, and that we do not need to be integrated, powerful, loud members of the community around us, that's a trauma response. That is expecting that the government will not care for me. That is expecting that the municipality, the city, whoever, the cops, whoever is there, will not see my humanity as inherent. And building a world where that is okay. And building a world where that is normal. And that's not the reality in rural communities. That's not the reality in remote communities. There are people who've never had to introduce themselves because everyone knows who they are. There are people who hold that kinship and hold those relationships. And for us to tell them, don't you need a place all by yourself though? Don't you need something that's absolutely separate and for you? Without that coming from their voice, without them speaking that to us, without them asking, hey, I need a safe room, can you make it for me? That is where that entitlement and that violence comes from, because and I'm gonna say I'm Irish descendant, so what's up homies? We're all in here together. But that is something that as white people, we haven't done the work to integrate our wounds and to have them be okay and to have them exist. We haven't done the work to recognize, yes, this suffering, this isolation, this breaks in relationships, that's gonna be a normal part of life. And we're gonna have to continue to go forward and mend those relationships constantly. And so our place as queer and trans and all of the other identities who hold power is to force that integration, is to do that healing work that we need to do inside of our heads so that we can actually show up for people and be real with them. And so I think what I ask is what pride means to me, or what the potential of pride has, is to build beyond my imagination and to build beyond my insecurities. And for me to allow there to be a place where those can rest together, you know? And for me to understand what inside of me is a sickness, what inside of me is limiting what is possible, and to limit the spread of that to other people who haven't had those experiences or other people who share other experiences. And a part of that, we all know how important it is to mask up, even though none of us are masked. I think that that's a reflection of what pride is doing in rural and remote communities and indigenous communities. Having that expectation on communities to do things that they've never done before, or telling them that this is what pride looks like, or identifying them for those things. And in Two-Spirit community, not everyone even identifies as Two-Spirit, you know? So even the intention that we're taking as outsiders and trying to, is this a bubble for you? Do you fit in here? Without asking someone? Literally just asking them, what do you need to live today? How do I support that? I think that's what pride means to me. And I also want to honor that I have built incredible relationships through our movement. Like, I am alive because of the work that people have done and the prides that people have established and the fact that I can see myself on stupid TV shows, you know? And I feel safe in that. And so I'm grateful for all the work. But I want to recognize that we're doing harm reduction. We're not doing good. We're just making the world slightly better. And I'm grateful for that work, and I hope it continues going forward. I'll let go.
I don't know how to follow that. For me, pride just means celebrating my true self. Celebrating love, fighting discrimination, and honoring like the differences.
Is it okay?
I'm done, I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, let me know. Thank you. You're doing great. Thank you.
So for me, what does pride mean? Maybe a little bit of history first. I could go into a lot of my experience, but I'll try to keep it brief. So I lived in Vancouver quite a while ago, and I was involved in pride at the time. All the different pride things you can imagine, but there was never Indigenous people or Indigenous representation there. Deaf people would be at pride, and that was something that was great for me. There was interpreters available at pride, but Indigenous deaf people, there's really only two of us. So the two of us had no power. We couldn't affect change. There was no Indigenous leadership set up and ready. There was no real representation for Vancouver Pride. Vancouver Pride Society didn't have that socialization and different events. There were so few things that were actually applicable and relevant. So we worked with the BC Rainbow Association of the Deaf, BC RAD. It's a deaf organized association, and it recognizes the culture and identity of deaf people. However, they again forgot Indigenous people. So there is BC RAD, an organization for pride for deaf folks, but again, Indigenous people weren't represented in that organization. I would talk to people, they would, much like we just heard, you either had to be gay or two-spirit. And I would often be told what two-spirit was. People wouldn't understand it. I would try to explain what two-spirit was, and all of a sudden I would be being told what I was supposed to actually feel. I faced all kinds of barriers, and that was, kind of my historical experience. When I moved to Penticton, I started participating in Kelowna events. Very similar experience to what I experienced in Vancouver as well. Very few deaf people, sometimes had interpreters, but no representation of Indigenous people. And Kelowna and Penticton had done some organizing together, and various communities around the valley have worked together at different times, but none of them really solved this issue. So I had approached Kelowna Pride about providing access and setting up some of that stuff. And so I saw some improvements, but I eventually moved to Toronto, and when I moved to Toronto, I was shocked that there were so many different associations with various representation. There was a two-spirit association. I felt like I could really connect and be represented in Toronto. So I decided I would do my schooling in Toronto. I'd do my CSW program there. And when I went to various community events organized by Pride or various Pride organizations, they provided access, they had all kinds of things. And through that experience, I really was able to understand my needs and understand what Pride meant to me. And there was very much a sense for quite a while that Pride was about, the LGBTQ community, and Two-Spirit was not part of Pride. But in my time in Toronto, I really learned that everyone has a place in Pride, and that's why I want to. I was doing workshops and facilitating workshops in Toronto, so I'm very grateful to the organizations there and the work that they were doing as well. And I would love to see that work spread across Canada. So, if we could see that happen in Edmonton, in Vancouver, that would be amazing for that representation to be present. So, that's kind of a timeline of how I've been involved and what I've noticed. And I know things are slow changes, that education takes time, but I think through networking events like this, resource sharing, workshops, that progress can be made. It's so hard because there is not many resources out there. So we really need to invest in resources. We need to look at what we're missing and what we need to better ourselves and break down those barriers. We can create resources, we can pull in the experts and people we need to advise us, and then create a pride organization that recognizes people as equals. And it is inclusive of all, including Two-Spirit folks. And that's my experience as a deaf Two-Spirit person. I can't take out parts of my identity. I firmly realize and sit in my identity. I can't just show up to something as a deaf person or as a Two-Spirit person. Much like you can't take out pieces of your identity. You have to live within your culture and within your sexuality. I think really we all just need to be able to be who we are. Again, I could go on a lot more, but I think I'll cut myself off there. But I want to share that little historical piece in my experience and kind of the timeline of my experience through Pride. And I really hope we can share more resources.
I'm gonna ask if you're okay to start the next question, Angelina. And I know you folks have already started some of the responses, and that is, what is missing in Pride organizing for First Nations, Métis, Inuit, Afro-Indigenous, and Black Indigenous folks?
I think what's missing is safe spaces for Two-Spirit people, medicine people. I think that there shouldn't have to be a strict schedule. There should be a space for us to go and debrief and to just be around people like us and to feel safe. Or just share our day-to-day thoughts. I think it's important for it to not just be a white space. Just let us be us and let us be who we are, and don't set up expectations for Two-Spirit people, Afro-Indigenous people.
Sunshine? What is missing? I'm going to ask you to go next, and then Quetzala. So I'll ask, what is missing in Pride, organizing for prides for Indigenous people?
What's missing? Access. I would say my main thing is access is missing. And also missing a supportive environment where we have each other's back. That feels like it's missing. And the conversations that we need to be having, I think those are missing. For me especially, I can miss out on conversations. People will come over and talk to me, realize that I'm deaf, and then that kind of ends our conversation. That goes back to access, but I would love to have that full experience where everyone is supported, getting what they need, has the access they need, and gets that great experience that we kind of all hope for.
Quetzala?
Something that we talked about yesterday was about how in queer community there's a lot of, depending on where you live, there's a lot of divides in between this is gay, this is bi, this is lesbian, this is trans, and my friend Sky was sharing about that. And we were talking about how in Two-Spirit community, we don't have the same kind of divisions. We don't ask you to justify like who you're attracted to or what your gender is. If you come in and you say you're Two-Spirit, we're like, okay, we got a whole bunch of different types in here. And so I think that kind of space is missing, and that openness, and like making that room for all of us, and having multiple folks come out from smaller communities, or come out from reserves, or come out from areas, so that they can go back home together, and they can share that energy together, and they can celebrate what they had together, and not feel that isolation of, I just felt the most accepted that I've ever felt in my life, and now I'm going back to, I can't leave my house because I am made fun of when I leave. And so recognizing that like there needs to be that solidarity, and even if it's intergenerational, Angelina and Marissa and Two Spirits in Motion just organized an incredible national youth gathering. And at that gathering, the first people to be invited were the youth council, and then the elders were invited to be invited. And so the making sure that there was going to be people who can actually hold the bigness and the massiveness of the folks who are going to be there, that was their first steps in making sure that it was going to be a safe event. So I'm really grateful to them for that work.
So the final question I have for folks, and I'll leave it to, I know I asked people to speak, but I'll leave it to you to volunteer popcorn style. Who wants to respond to it first? What should organizers be aware of for future Pride events, specifically for Indigenous people?
It's really incredible to have a grand marshal, and to have someone open things up, and to have a keynote, or to have one person be the star. But how's that person being taken care of in their entire journey? When we're inviting an individual, are we inviting their elders? Are we inviting their parents? Are we inviting their kids? Are we inviting their medicine keepers? Are we inviting people who can make sure that they stay healthy to take care of all of those responsibilities? And in doing that, when we're welcoming people in, if we're doing a parade, how are we cleansing the land? How are we making sure that we are putting those offerings down to the land so that the land actually wants us there and celebrates with us? And it isn't just another day that there's a bunch of glitter and gum that gets left there. How are we making sure that that's being taken care of? How are we holding those roles of stewards? And if we don't have an understanding of what it is to be a steward, then we're probably not the people who are supposed to hold that role. So how are we making sure that people who do know how to hold those roles, who the land itself taught them how to govern, taught them how to live, how are we making sure that those are the loudest voices, is the ones that in English we can't even hear, you know? Yeah.
So, for the benefit of kind of future events, I would say including Indigenous elders, inviting elders to be part of the event, and also youth. As someone that's getting a little bit older, we need to take care of passing along this to youth. So we need to be able to teach them and pass along our knowledge. That could be through workshops or facilitation of activities. But we need to have something going on so that we can pass along kind of these traditions. And like we just heard, taking care of the land. Actually, if you're organizing something, contact the Friendship Center, get them involved. Get local organizations and invited guests to the land involved in the organization of it. I think, what else? I think that's probably all I would have. If something else comes up, I will, I'll jump in again, or I'll mention it at some point.
I just think it's really important to invite youth and let youth speak on our experiences. I'm looking around and I don't see youth. It's like less than 10 of us here.
Mhm. So now I had questions, but I wanted to provide an opportunity for you folks to leave any last comments with relatives here on moving forward as they go back to their own board meetings, their own employment meetings, and committees or working groups to support planning for their prides, or how to promote and elevate and start the process. What would you like to leave with folks? And I'll start with Sunshine then and go left.
So, for prioritizations in the future, invite Indigenous folks to do an opening, closing of the Pride event, smudging. Make sure that there is space, just time for people to spend together, and of course provide access. I'll look at getting interpreters for deaf folks, or captioning card if needed. Make sure physical spaces are accessible with ramps, whatever may be needed to meet accessibility needs. And kind of expand boards to ensure that you have representation from various identities. I think that will help the community. Yeah, thank you.
I think something that would be good to talk about is how to get in touch with youth too, like using media and stuff like that. Yeah, I think for me, don't host if you don't have a good relationship. Just don't do it. Like, there's so many funds that can be used to feed people, to build those relationships, to have that time. So what if there's not a Pride this year? So what? How many other life-giving events can be created? How many other safe spaces can be made? How many spaces that are quiet and that are loud can still fit into that month of celebration that we have, but that don't create that authority of what it is to be queerness in that place, without going to the spiritual authorities of that place and making sure that you have that consent and that you're able to have those relationships. And an example that I can provide of that is, did anybody go to ILGA last year, International Lesbian and Gay Association? They didn't do a territory acknowledgement because one Indigenous person who lives in Geneva told them that territory acknowledgements were for white people. And so they didn't. And they didn't recognize Olympic people, they didn't welcome them, they didn't have them there. And then for all of the Indigenous folks who came there, we were shook. And we're like, what is happening right now? Why has there been no mention at all of the land that we're on? No mention at all that Indigenous people exist at all. Like, what are we doing here? And so that's also a thing of like, who are the Indigenous voices who you have in the room? Somebody who has the capacity to be on a board is probably well employed, has got a lot of jobs, maybe owns a house. That might not be the average Indigenous person that is in your community. So how are you making sure that everybody who is in community is able to access that place? Something that Percy often talks about is, if you want to hire a Two-Spirit ED, you got to have a Two-Spirit board, you got to have Two-Spirit staff, you have to have BIPOC folks who are there who can hold community together and who can do these roles and who aren't just called on every time there is a culturally specific emergency that they need to be the solution to. And who isn't burnt out because all day they're already dealing with what it is to be a Two-Spirit person. And then they need to go and hold space for 20 or 30 other Two-Spirit people to hold that experience. And who do they go home to, So I think that really slowing down and figuring out where is that urgency and what do you want? If you are a non-Indigenous person, what are your motivations? What do you want to make happen on territories that aren't yours? Whose bodies, whose blood, whose land, whose resources are you going to use to make your visions happen and come true? And are all of them consenting to that? Are all of them a part of that? Are all of them as equally invested in that? Or is this an act of extraction? And I think to lead it into, which you don't have to talk about this, but I would love you to talk about this, those extractive relationships that people have with youth, you know? Like inviting youth and not paying them, inviting youth and not supporting them, inviting youth and like not having a safe person for them to go to or even know anybody in that space. Like that is alienating youth and that is risking youth. And that is something that like, we're not telling you that at every Two-Spirit gathering, it's super safe, it's great, nobody is harmed. At Two-Spirit gatherings, people also attempt suicide. At Two-Spirit gatherings, people also are misgendered. At Two-Spirit gatherings, people are disrespected. But we are also just trying to deal with it as much as everyone else is. But the fact that we can come to you with that humbleness and say to you, this is what we need, or we too are working on this, like that's the reflection, that's the mirror we want to see when we look at you. Is when you're walking up to an Indigenous person and asking them to participate in this, start with your flaws. Start and tell them the reality. That's that kinship care. What are they stepping into, and can they consent to be a part of that?
I just wanted to say, just check out our podcast. I'm all about amplifying youth voices, and that's what we do. It's called Between Two Spirits. You can listen to it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Yeah. And follow us on Instagram. Spirits and Motion Society.
I had considered, I know there are microphones out there, and I'd considered an opportunity for question and answer. I'm going to ex-nay that because it's my responsibility to care for these folks. They have just given you, for those who have to do your strategic plans, they've given you 5 years, 10 years, 15 years work. And I'm serious. And they've given you work plans to come up in co-collaboration with the relationships that you are going to be committed to build, where your agencies are, or where you come from as board members for the next 15 years, just on this one conversation. They've generously given to you. I don't want you to take anything more from them because I think it's important that folks in the discomfort, as someone who is an educator and having to talk about the experiences of Indigenous people on Turtle Island every single day to people who pay a tuition to get an undergrad, a master's, or a doctorate. I take that role in being able to create the environment where learning can take place. So hopefully this opportunity this morning, as you finish your tea, your coffee, your juice, your hash browns, you're able to marinate in that discomfort, and that you're actually able to take away what was generously gifted to you by these panelists, by these relatives, ways to truly elevate and promote Indigenous folks on the original lands where you folks will go back to as a starting point. Now, colonialism may have come to us one way, but the interventions that need to happen are multiple, and you are part of that. So in terms of truth and reconciliation, with one event, with the Indian residential schools that happened 126 years, and that you were gifted in 2015, the TRC calls to action, we need the same amount of years for Indigenous people to tell their truth. And we haven't met 126 years, folks. And that doesn't talk about all of the other harms that happen to our Métis relatives or Inuit relatives and their experiences through the acts of colonialism that birthed this nation's colonial state. So folks, if you are tired of hearing about the experience of Indigenous people, in order for something to be sustainable and in co-collaboration, you're still gonna have to hear the truth for at least 126 more years, right? And I task folks here that you leverage your whiteness, you leverage the power and the decision-making you have, apart from the place of fragility, but actually wanting to be in relationship with the land, the people who are just trying to make it through the day, right? So with that, I know there was a lot of information shared. I would rather have my medallion on, but it has red. I'm immunocompromised, so distance from me. I'm not into hugging, but I'm into being in conversation. And I thank you folks for showing up, for sitting and listening to the jewels and the generosity that was brought into the room, because this just didn't happen today. It happened because each one of these people on this platform are bundles, and it's taken their ancestors who came before them and us, who helped them become the people they are today, and that they were able to share that with you a little bit as they opened their bundle and shared that in the spirit of connection and truth-telling. So please care for it, be kind and gentle, and I believe we're at the point where we're going to be having a rest. So please join me in gratitude for our relatives and kin here, Sunshine, Angelina, and Quetzala, and Taylor McKelty, who had to go. Please help me give our gratitude to these folks.